amazing how 9 of us are here.
Here's my cards. All right, over the years, recorded back as far as 500 years ago, as written in an article, Influenza, the Once and Future Pandemic by the U.S. National Library of Medicine. Our world has been plagued by reoccurring pandemics of a virus that has taken the lives of people young and old. This virus has taken the lives of millions of people around the world. I am here today to inform you of a commonly known virus called influenza. Today we will discuss a brief history of the worst pandemic in recorded history around the world. I am here to inform you about common signs and symptoms of influenza, and lastly we'll discuss some preventative measures we can take to protect ourselves and our loved ones from this virus. There's more information that you can find on influenza through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention website, cdc.org. Seeing as today is a brief overview, I encourage all to make sure that they visit this website and get some more information. Let's start by taking a trip back in time to 1918. This year was known as the worst pandemic of influenza in recorded history. The strain of the virus that year was H1N1. In an article called Remembering the 1918 Influenza Pandemic by the National Center for Immunizations and Respiratory Disease, they discuss how it was estimated that 500 million people around the world contracted the virus that year, which resulted in 50 million deaths. 675,000 of those deaths were within the United States. They believe that the death rate was so high due to lack of knowledge of the virus at the time, and also they didn't have access to antibiotics like we do nowadays to be able to treat secondary infections like pneumonia that might occur due to influenza. There have been many other pandemics since. They have been less severe, but they continue to plague our world. While the overall history of influenza can be overwhelming, there's also many things that have been given to us as the average person to be able to be aware of this virus. Some of those include to be able to watch for the common signs and symptoms of influenza. I have spent the past 5 years working in the medical field. During that time, I've had to work with patients and discuss these signs and symptoms. They include, but are definitely not limited to, cough, congestion, headaches, body aches, fever, at times nausea and vomiting, although those are less common. These signs and symptoms seem to be similar to that of a common cold. The Centers for Disease Control explains that the common cold and influenza differ in the fact that common cold has more of a gradual onset of the symptoms, where influenza has a very rapid onset. The Centers for Disease Control, in an article called Flu Symptoms and Complications, explains some of the more life-threatening complications that we need to be aware of. Those can include trouble breathing, blue-colored skin, inability to eat or drink, dehydration, confusion, dizziness. If somebody is showing those signs, it is important to seek medical attention for them immediately. So now that we know what we're looking for, how do we prevent such a virus? Well, that happens through the research that has been given to us in the medical field. They have developed an influenza vaccine. The very first vaccine was developed in 1938 by Jonas Salk. Vaccines can be given to healthy individuals aged 6 months of age and older. In an article on the flu vaccine by Charles Patrick Davis, he's a board-certified emergency medical doctor with a PhD in microbiology. He explains why we need to receive this vaccination every year. He explains how the genetic information that is a part of the virus itself can mutate or change over time. With these changes, the vaccination that we were previously given is no longer effective, and therefore we need a new vaccination to be able to protect ourselves from the virus. Vaccination itself is not 100%, and so what do we do if we still contract the virus? Is there anything that can help us? And the CDC writes an article on what we should know about flu antiviral drugs. Antivirals have been developed to help lessen the symptoms of flu, lessen the severity of them, and also to shorten the span in which one's contracted with the influenza virus. Antivirals must be started as soon as possible. They are most effective when they're started within 48 hours of the onset of symptoms. Antivirals are not a cure-all, end-all. It's still important that we manage our temperature, we hydrate properly, and that we watch for worsening signs, and if necessary, we receive medical attention. So in conclusion, while the history of influenza can be overwhelming and scary, we have been given many keys to help protect ourselves and to help watch out and save the lives of ourselves and those around us. Thank you. Thanks, guys.